Mr. Kirkpatrick, Ms. Schroeder, if you could ascend the podium. And Mr. Kirkpatrick again.
Yes, I would like to begin by just noting that the idea of a free market emerged into history at the same time as the idea of free government. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was published in 1776, the same year as our own Declaration of Independence. As Marxists like to say, it is no coincidence that. Since the emergence of the idea of a free market, the world has had experience with its consequences, and the most important of those consequences have been economic growth. The fantastically rapid, great increase in wealth and growth and in human well-being. Very interesting thing happened. Societies which grew richer offered a better life for their citizens. It's still happening. Societies which rely, generally speaking, on free market principles grow richer, develop faster, and offer more good things of life to their citizens. South Korea offers more good things of better standard of living to its citizens than North Korea. West Germany than East Germany. Austria than Czechoslovakia. Taiwan than the People's Republic of China, and so forth. The moral is clear. Socialism doesn't work. Free markets work.
Ms. Schroeder.
Thank you, and I too am delighted to be here at Ole Miss, and thank you all for your wonderful hospitality. Let me say, I think that this question should be phrased differently. I think the question is phrased in the 18th century mode. What we should be talking about is what kind of a mixed economy do we need to be competitive in the 21st century. Now, what do I mean by that? I can't believe that anyone at either table is going to sit here and argue that we should just unleash industry and see what happens. If they want to tear down every tree, dirty every stream, if airlines don't want to repair their airlines or whatever, we'll just all live with that risk. I think we know that's not the way to do it. I think we also know that even the economies Gene's talking about are not totally free. Ever try and get a lot of your market products from the United States into Korea? They may have a freer than North Korea, but they're not real excited about trading. So you need a government that is very strong in insisting that we have reciprocal free trade with other countries so America can run. I just want to add that FDR was the man that George Will said saved capitalism from itself. I think that's very important. And I think that Jack Kemp's measurement's exactly right. You measure a government by how few people still need help. Unfortunately, after 8 years of the Reagan-Bush administration, more people need help than needed at the beginning. And I'm saying that was the debt says we need some other things.
Ms. Kirkpatrick, do you have a question for the Congresswoman?
Yes, my question, Pat, is why are you so eager to mix something that doesn't work, that's an admitted evil in itself, like controls and taxes and regulations, with something that works reasonably well, namely a self-regulating market?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean that I'm trying to mix.
I think you keep talking about the desirability of a mixed economy as though it were good in itself.
No, I think what I'm saying...
Maybe a necessity in itself in our times, I'll buy that, but it isn't a good in itself.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, Gene, is this: if you look at the Japanese economy, if you look at other economies, their governments are helping certain industries with research and development, with infrastructure, with trading, with market shares. And if we sit here quietly and make our companies compete in the global market, we lose. I mean, that's why our trade debt went up again yesterday, even though the dollar's in the bottom. And I'm saying we should be having this debate on what kind of mix makes the most sense. I've too voted against the Lockheed bailout and the Chrysler bailout. I mean, I don't like that. I've also got to wake up and say we're in a global economy, and that unfortunately the Koreans and the Japanese and a lot of the Europeans are playing by different rules. And to throw our guys out there to try and compete, they get beat up. So what I think our debate should be is, what should the mix be? We don't want to go any further than we have to, because we know the more freedom that's possible, the better. And how do we use our international leverage to try and get more freedom in these other countries?
I think that's an interesting question, but it's a different question, of course.
Well, it is, and that's why I'm saying I think our topic is more 18th century and not 20th.
Okay.
You have another different question?
I've got to let my team...
No, it's all yours if you want it.
Oh, it's all my question.
Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry. I forgot. That's...
Well, why don't you ask her
yeah,
a question?
Okay. Well, let me ask one, because I've always really respected your ability in foreign affairs and how good you were at negotiating. The first thing I want to know is, how could the Reagan administration, with its love of the free market and everything, not have been much more aggressive in the 80s on the reciprocal free market? It's like the reciprocal thing dropped out. We kept the free market here, but we didn't push as hard, I don't think. And what really happened that we got distracted from that? Was it the
Well, I'm
Cold War?
sure you
What was it?
understand that the Reagan administration believed, most people in the Reagan administration believed, that consumers' well-being should take priority, and that consumers' well-being is served by permitting as free trade as possible, which will guarantee lower prices, better goods at lower prices, and they were not, therefore, as concerned with reciprocity, strict reciprocity, as you are, because they did not believe that it delivers the goods at the lowest, highest quality, lowest price to the consumer. That's the answer.
I guess my frustration is, though, is if you look at it from the consumer standpoint and then flip it, the consumers in Japan certainly weren't getting a good deal on beef or agricultural products.
Consumers in
or the
Japan,
foods we
Pat,
were-
don't get a good deal on almost anything,
Exactly.
as you and I both
Exactly.
know. And they don't get a good deal, you know, their industrial policy doesn't give them a good deal, and their protectionist policies in their market doesn't give them a good deal. Fact is, consumers in Japan have a very raw deal across the board.
And I think you
we
and
wouldn't
I...
want to follow that example.
No, we don't. And that's my point. I mean, I think you and I are very proud of the women in Japan who are finally standing up and asking
Yes, we are.
some consumer
Yeah.
questions. But I guess what I'm saying is, the administration, I think, focused on our consumers without realizing that insisting on reciprocity would have helped the Japanese consumer as well as our industrial base.
Pat,
And-
I
and
believe
I hear what you're
myself. Is that a
saying.
question?
Well, no, it's not a
Now,
question.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
And what I would like to ask you is, in fact, what you take to be the optimum point for government participation in the economy. You keep talking about a mixed economy. How much regulation do you want to mix into your economy? How many taxes do you want to mix into your economy? How much government subsidization through industrial policy do you want to mix into your economy? And how much do you have to mix before you arrive at the kind of socialism that lowers your national product and your national income and the income of almost everybody in the society?
It's a
And
difficult...
does that worry you?
It worries me, and I think it's the thing we should be focusing on. And I appreciate your asking the question, because I think where we come out, the trends are, in 1980, we had a 50-50 government mix on research and development, half government money going into military, half going into the civilian. Now we have an 80% going into the military, 20% in civilian. In the interim, we see other countries putting much more into the civilian side. Now, with our debt, you can make an argument. It's not a good idea for the government to do more research and development, so we're out front, whether you're talking about high-definition television or whatever market we're talking about losing next. But then the other side should be, if you've got a tax policy and you sit there and look at it, which is the other way we subsidize.
So you want to, so what is it you
Well,
want to
I'm
protect?
trying to say to
you want to
compete
protect
in the
high
world.
definition television, is that right?
To compete-
What exactly is it you want to protect?
I'm not trying to protect anything. I'm trying to protect our market share and our industrial lead in the world. To do that, we have to stay out front on research and development. We know that the world doesn't just stop, and that other people have moved and they're now selling better television, better radio, better everything. So how do we encourage research and development? That should be an issue for the federal government. If we don't do it through subsidy, should we do it through the tax code? When you've got
And
companies...
those of us who support free market economics believe that the free market works best because it relies on the creative individual,
That's right.
precisely for innovation and
But-
for development. That's what we believe.
But now
We believe that competition, moreover, and rewards, like profit, stimulate
Sure.
creativity in individuals.
But Jean, you know and I know that the one thing this government needs too is savings. We need more savings for that free market individual to be able to get money to invest in himself. So we should be encouraging more savings with our tax code. Instead, we're encouraging consumption. We should be encouraging corporations to put more money in research and development instead of entertainment. Instead, it's more entertainment than research and development. What I'm trying to say is, I think we have to look at the real world, and I want to maintain America's front position. And I'm very worried that the only thing we're going to have to throw at the Soviets is a burger. I mean, and this week, this week the Japanese opened their first fast food, in America, in Honolulu. So maybe we won't even have that. I'm
I
just
had some
saying
Japanese
that's
fast
the mix.
food on a United Airlines flight only yesterday,
you didn't
and
like
I don't
it.
think it's going to catch on, frankly.
Well,
But,
we thought that about banking, and we thought that about all sorts of things. But I think you and I would be in agreement that that's kind of how we should be talking about the mix. Not that government runs these things, but how do we make a world where our...
government is just people acting on behalf of others rather than people acting on their own behalf. And the interesting thing is that always sounds very good. It sounds very altruistic. The problem is it just doesn't work very well.
We noticed that.
Now, government labs do very well at certain things,
Well, but the
but
government...
they don't do well at most things. They don't do as well as private labs in innovation,
That's right.
and creativity.
But you can, and we have done it in medicine, we have done it in distinguished universities such as yours, which gets tremendous federal help,
Which is a private university, by the way.
But-
She's speaking of Georgetown University.
but it does get it does get federal funds. And that has been the tremendous coalition that's built this country, and I want to keep building.
Thank you both.
So do I.
Thank you both. Mr. Gingrich. We were getting alarmingly close to agreement there, which is against the rules of this format, I'm afraid. Mr. Gingrich, you have an opening statement, or at least we hope so.
Well, let me start by saying that I appreciated your earlier plug, but you didn't mention that the book's title is Window of Opportunity, and it is still available, and as long as we're into free enterprise. The purpose, I think it's important to go back to the proposition, which is free market competitiveness is best for America. And the key question, which our good friends on the left aren't answering, is what produces the money to help the poor? We believe on our side that free market competitiveness produces more resources to allow us to be more generous to help more people. Now, I listened the other night as Joe Biden suggested that his parents, having only weathered the Depression and the Second World War, didn't face the kind of problems we did. And I wondered how often liberal Democrats forgot history. But when Mrs. Schroeder earlier said, quote, after 8 years of the Reagan-Bush administration, more people need help than at the beginning, I wondered what sort of amnesia we were engaging in. The beginning, you'll remember, was Jimmy Carter. It was 23% interest rates, 13% inflation, the stage being set for the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And my only thought as we stand here tonight with the Soviet Empire in the middle of a deep depression is, with Boris Yeltsin visiting, if he's watching this show, he must wonder if this is a rerun from a debate from an earlier era, because he couldn't possibly believe that, in fact, people really don't believe the free market doesn't work in America.
Thank you. Senator McGovern, pop a question.
Congressman, I'm not sure that we quite know yet what you people mean by free market competitiveness. Dr. Kirkpatrick just objected to our concept of a mixed economy in which there is some important role for free competitive economics, but also some role for the government and the public interest. She suggested that it might be a mistake to mix what she referred to as bad things, like government programs and taxes, with wonderful things like the profit system. Does that mean that you people want to terminate all government programs that impinge in any way on the economy? For example, would you get rid of guaranteed bank deposits? Would you get rid of the rural electrification program? Would you get rid of the Tennessee Valley Authority? Would you end would you end the Social Security program and collective bargaining
Stop right
rates?
there. That's
In other words, I think we can let him continue to develop the,
Well, I'm just
the most
trying to-
extreme possible question, because it's a legitimate
I
extreme
think with
question.
the, you know, we've come now to the fourth or fifth speaker. Maybe we ought to define the terms. What does a free competitive market mean?
Let me say that I think there are a couple of big questions we've answered in America. The first is that at a macro level, government clearly uses taxes in a very broad way to shape behavior. That was settled initially by Alexander Hamilton in the first report on Treasury in 1791, first report on manufacturers. And in a broad sense, we as a country function that way. Taxes do have some effect on shaping the economy, but it's a very broad effect, and everybody can play within that arena. Second, we decided during the progressive era that we believe in refereed free enterprise. Everyone wants to know when they walk into McDonald's that they're actually buying beef and that it actually is healthy. And I think there's a broad consensus in this country that government has, in that sense, a public health, public safety refereeing role. Where I think these two sides debate is over the question of whether the market and the marketplace are more powerful guides to how we should invest the future, or whether government bureaucracy, the American version of MITI, some kind of government dirigism in the French sense, should lead us and guide us in terms of economic growth. And I think there's a fundamental distinction over how you should have it, because the question is free market competitiveness best for America? My presumption is that the alternative to free market competitiveness would be bureaucratic guidance and bureaucratic planning. And I happen to think that doesn't work.
Senator McGovern. I saw Senator Hart. I'm sorry.
Congressman, no one on this side, indeed in my party that I know of, is advocating centralized control of the economy or management of the economy. No one here tonight has spoken for that. Suppose in your district there is a plant that employs 5,000 people. Suppose that plant, in part because of foreign competition, but in larger part because of mismanagement and incompetence, is on the verge of bankruptcy. The plant managers and owners come to you and say, will you introduce legislation in the Congress of the United States to provide federal loan guarantees so that we can work our way out of this bankruptcy? What is your response?
Well, let me give you a very real current problem. We have a strike which affects 7,000
I want you to
families in my
answer
district.
I don't want to hear the...
Well,
I want to...
You want to hear a real answer to the
I want to
hypothetical
hear the
question?
answer to the question I asked you.
We'll take any answer we can get. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I'll respond to our... But there's a real crisis, and it's a real human crisis. Some people wish and have said to me in town hall meetings, couldn't the government step in and buy Eastern Airlines? Couldn't the government somehow bail out Eastern Airlines and allow us to go back to work without Frank Lorenzo? And the frank answer is, under the American system, there is no direct way, as much as you would like to. There's no direct way for the government to directly get involved without starting down the road towards the kind of system which weakened Britain.
It's exactly what we did with Chrysler. It's exactly what the government of the United States did with the Chrysler Corporation. Exactly.
That's right. And the net loss of jobs in the Chrysler situation was substantial. And the question I would ask you is, how many companies did you not bail out that year? How many companies did you let go broke because they didn't have the political clout of Lee Iacocca? They didn't have the United Auto
I didn't
Workers.
vote for the Chrysler bailout. Don't.
Okay. So I'm just saying, once you start picking
Now will you answer
winners
my
and- once you
question?
start picking winners and losers,
So you will not
shift from the
support-
marketplace to the lobbyist in Washington, and the best lobbyist gets the biggest bailout from
So
the
you're going to
politician.
say no to the corporation. You're going to say no to the corporation in your district.
I think you are describing a system in which politicians prop up the past take money away from the future and guarantee fewer jobs at lower salaries for the long run for the American people. And I frankly think that's exactly what Margaret Thatcher rebelled against in Britain. I think you've stated clearly the difference between these two sides. We want the marketplace to direct the best investment to create the highest value job, to create the most opportunity for Americans. And for the last 7.5 years, our system has been working.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks. You're all through. Senator Hart, please ascend the podium. Am I right? Yes. And you have an opening statement and then submit to the question.
Thank you very much.
The opposition.
There is no real dispute over the basic proposition here. No one on this side is in favor of a centralized government-controlled economy. No one here has advocated socialism. And I don't think anyone in my party or on this debating side of the issue has advocated that the federal government, or indeed any other government, ought to do anything that the private markets can't do better. The real issue is, are there services that need to be performed which private markets will not or cannot perform at a profit? Will those private markets provide broad-based education for our children? I don't think so. Will they provide security for the elderly? No, not at all. Will they provide minimum medical care for the poor and the elderly? No. Meals for poor children? No. Housing for the poor? No. Will they ensure the quality of the food and the pharmaceuticals we use? I don't think so. And the list goes on. Not the least of which item on that list is, will those markets provide for the common defense? The answer is no. So the real question is, under what terms and conditions should government promote the general welfare and the public interest when markets can't or won't do so? The opponents have said that government always goes too far. For those who, on that side of this debate, or indeed have sentiment for their position, I can only say, if you want the government off your back, get your hands out of its pockets.
Mr. Gingrich. All right. Now, wait a minute. You've already spoken. Mr. Kemp, go ahead. All right. All right, go ahead.
Back to Senator Hart's question. If you start with the plant that has 5,000 jobs, do you then bail out the plant that has 500 jobs, and do you then bail out the small business that has 5 jobs? Where do you draw the line at where the politicians step in to block the marketplace?
I don't think there is a clear distinction, and I think that's the point that Congresswoman Schroeder has been trying to make here tonight, that we don't have a pure free market economy after 25 years, only 4 of which the Democrats were in the White House. All the bad things in the world did not begin in 1976. I think we ought to start with that proposition. There were Republicans in the White House more years in those terrible 70s than there were Democrats. So anyone who keeps trying to lay the problems and blames of this country on past President Carter, I think, is just missing the point. I don't think there is a clear line, Congressman, and I think, frankly, the answer to my question, if you were to ask me the question that I asked you, it would be a tough question, because I am elected, or was elected by the people of Colorado to represent their interests. And if 5,000 of those people thought their interest was in keeping that plant open, I would be very sympathetic to their plight. But on the other hand, if their own managers are the ones that put them in jeopardy, I wouldn't be very sympathetic to them.
Mr. Camp.
I have a question, Gary. Gene Kirkpatrick reminded us of the differences between the collectivist or socialist model since 1776 versus the democratic capitalist model, and we'll accept the fact that you believe in freedom, because we know you do, and we respect that of each other. And I would hope that we could beat down the straw man that we're arguing for, again, an 18th century model. What we're arguing about is that a real-world example exists. Europe and the United States. In the last 8 years, the United States has created 19 million new jobs in the private sector, 4 million new small businessmen and women, has had an ability to both to grow without inflation that has been basically signaled around the world as a, if not miracle, at least an awfully good recovery. Europe in the last 10 years has lost 3 million jobs. They've followed the industrial policies that, in fact, you have been one of the leading proponents of. So tonight, it is important for us to know what type of an industrial policy would you have America follow that would create 19 million jobs and 3-4 million new small businesses in the next 10 years.
I would advocate an industrial policy that, first of all, has our government doing the job that Congresswoman Schroeder said, and that is opening markets for our products abroad, which the Republican governments of the 1980s have not done. It's not a question of being preoccupied with something else. They just didn't do it, and they should.
I mean, exports are down, not up, over the last 8 years?
The trade deficit continues, as I recall.
Are exports up or down?
In an expanding export world, we are losing market share. Of
Are
course they're
exports
going
up or not?
Yeah, they're not as much up as the Japanese or Germans. The government of the United States, the policy which I support, is one of providing, as I've said, the services that the private sector cannot or will not provide, and finally offering the kind of technical assistance and training for workers that I think this country is going to need if it is going to compete with those Japanese and Germans and others.
Mr. Buckley.
Senator Hart, has Professor Galbraith authorized you to say that, quote, no one here has advocated socialism?
Well, on the grounds that you may have a quote in front of you written some years ago by one of our panelists, let me just say that no one here tonight has advocated socialism.
Well, in that case, would you remind one of the panelists, Professor Galbraith, that it will be a historic evening if he renounces the socialism which he has defended vigorously and explicitly for the last 16 years? Let me ask you, do you have any figures on the number of children who starved before the federal government undertook to feed them?
No, I do not. The federal government, by the way, has not undertaken to feed the children of this country. It did undertake, with bipartisan support some years ago, to guarantee that poor children in this country had at least one nutritious meal. If you're against that, I think we ought to know that.
You mean, am I against nutrition? I'm not against nutrition. I'm against the proposition that children would starve save for the existence of government.
I didn't say
government does nothing but implement social policy. Why do we have to go to Washington to feed children?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah. Maybe it's because the markets don't always work.
Well, but Mississippi is the poorest state in the Union, and I'm not aware that anybody in Mississippi is permitted to starve,
I didn't use the word
irrespective of whether Washington's attention is called to their plate.
I didn't use the word
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Buckley, your turn.